Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from John's third chapter. We made it all the way up into the 12th verse. We're going to take it from the 13th all the way to the 21st. What begins as a dialogue between Nicodemus and him ends as sort of a monologue. And the final question that Nicodemus asked, first off, Nicodemus is a Pharisee who came to him by night, and he was persuaded by the evidence of his miracles. We only read of the one miracle in the second chapter, the transmutation of the water into wine at the wedding feast of Cana. But miracles, plural, appears in this, so many miracles proceeded between the writing, the chronology of the second and the third chapter. And he's convinced that no one is able to do these signs you do if Elohim is not with him. And then Yahshua takes it in an unexpected direction. He comes to teach him. So Nicodemus came looking for and seeking for information, but what Yahshua offers him is transformation. And what he has to say is something significant to our salvation, without which we cannot hope to attain that blessed abode. And he speaks to him that unless one is born from above, he is unable to see the reign of Elohim. So the necessity is communicated therein. Without it, we have no hope of attaining heaven. And Nicodemus is confused because he's approaching this, as we see so often throughout the Gospel of John, beginning in the second chapter, when he refers to the temple of his body, and also in the fourth chapter when he speaks of the living water to the Samaritan woman. They interpret this in a very literal, physical, realistic lens, but Yahshua corrects him and say this is the birth of water and the Spirit. So it is not a natural birth, it is a supernatural birth. And I myself underwent one some 7 years ago. I consider myself 7 years old in Christian years, 32 in physical years. But I can testify to the efficacy of the born-again experience. My assurance is bound in my maintenance to the integrity of the born-again initiative, which launched it all. But he also compares it to the Ruah, the Spirit, that it's invisible and almost impenetrable, but his penetration is very real. Once you've been visited by it, you will know that you have been born of the Spirit. It's likened to the wind in that it's unpredictable, uncontrollable, and unfathomable, but is beyond us and is working for us, and we should not resist the Spirit in whatever way, shape, or form it comes to us. Realistically, tragically, and fatally, many people do resist the Spirit speaking to them. They are disturbed by the conviction that he produces, so they shut out their ears. And when you stop struggling with sin, that's when you've surrendered, so you're already defeated. But Nicodemus once more asks, how is this possible then to take place? So he's speaking of something distinct from the birth through the womb, and he wants to know, how can this take place? And Yahshua chides him as being a ruler of a synagogue, so he was a rabbi, also a member of the Sanhedrin, so he did wield some significant influence. He was a minority on that battle side, such as we witness in the 7th chapter, when they are determined to go to unlawful extremes to arrest him and expose him as a lawbreaker. He pleads for the integrity of the law, and in the 19th chapter we witness him publicly confessing his faith at his death. So it is a process with Nicodemus. Nicodemus is also a man we only meet in the Gospel of John, and then in those three places. So what we witness through Nicodemus is what I liken to the stepping stones of faith. There are 4 of them: curiosity, conviction, conversion, commitment. And Nicodemus underwent the first in the 3rd chapter. He was genuinely sincere. He had no malicious motive or intent. Often when we see a Pharisee approach him, they say that they are trying to trap him or try him. But this one came with genuine concerns and answers that he knew he couldn't answer himself, but he had a mustard seed of faith that this man could, and he told him the answer to the question he didn't even know he had. and we are all indebted to the dialogue. But after that, we witness a sort of dialogue, and the quotation marks in the Greek definitively end in the 15th verse, but some translations have the 16th to the 21st as the Messiah's own words marked in red, and others have it as John's commentary, but we want to treat it as one and the same. So the word is the word, no matter from whom it comes, no matter who it speaks itself through, it is still the word. So that being settled, we're going to open with the lesson itself, which begins in the 13th chapter. And in the 12th chapter, we read that he's saying, if you do not believe what I spoke to you about earthly, how are you going to believe what I speak to you about that of the heavens? So the heavens forms the link between what he speaks of then and what he's about to speak of now. And no one has gone up into the heavens except he who came down from the heavens, the Son of Man. So there are two directions, the ascension and the condescension. And a man once ascended, once he's in heaven, there is an eternal separation between him and this earth. He cannot contact, he cannot communicate it, but he is the intermediary on our behalves. So he's with us on earth and he's with them in heaven. But the condescension, now when we think of that humanly, we think of a condescension, one who looks down their nose. But in the theological and positive sense of the word, it is a coming down from heaven to earth, and that is in fact a great act of humility, whereas human condescension is an act of arrogance, pride, and impudence. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man has to be lifted up. So he's using the illustration example of Moses as outlined in Numbers 21, verses 8 and 9. The Israelites of the Exodus generation were bitten by snakes, so Yahweh commanded Moses to hold up a staff. The same staff that had turned the Nile River into blood, the first plague of Egypt, was also turned into a serpent with which the afflicted Israelites could look upon and be healed and be saved. And so that typology and that symbolism survives from the Old to the New Covenant, much as the Israelites had to look up to him to be saved and healed, so too must we look up to the healed. And the term so he establishes the chronological context, and then he implies it to himself. And the term lifted up, it means two things. It means crucified and exalted. And the paradox is that his exaltation comes from the crucifixion. So before the crown, there had to come the cross. Before the splendor, there had to become the suffering. And if that was the case for the Master, then we who call ourselves his disciples have no right or reasonable expectation to expect it to be otherwise in us as it was for him. So that whoever is believing in him should not perish, but possess everlasting life. Now the verb believe appears throughout John. He never uses the noun faith. That is a word that is foreign to his vocabulary, at least in written form as recorded in the canon. He always and only uses belief, and faith is best not understood as a dry abstract doctrine, but a command. So I think the verb is almost more appropriate, even though I do appreciate the appearance of the word faith. I respect John's emphasis to always and only categorize it as a verb, an action-oriented concept which should stimulate one into action, or else it is useless and for naught. But here he says that those who believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And this bleeds over into the 16th verse. And remember, this is the division where the Greek is not exactly clear, the Greek original, between where Yahshua is speaking and where John is commentating on. But we're going to treat it as one of the same, and how appropriate for the most famous passage in the Bible. Football fans can recite it. Non-believers know it. It is a symbolism that resonates throughout society, even though most of our culture and generation has fallen away and estranged from God and his word. They pretty much all know John 3:16, which reads, "For Elohim so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that everyone who believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." So the main reason for his condescension, remember that he came to earth when he was from heaven. He was exalted in heaven, but he condescended to earth. And the reason that he did that is as an act of love for the Father to send his Son to earth as one of us. We like to envision, man has a God complex. We like to long to be up there. We like to be our own gods, make up our own system of morals. But the interesting thing about God is that he has a human complex, which is manifest in the word incarnate, the Son who was of flesh and blood, just like us. So he did sink to our level, and in order to point us the way to him, and the only thing we have to do is believe in him, believe that he was who he says he was, believe that he is the only name through which salvation can come, believe that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and everything else we read about him. But belief is once more the action and the verb, so we have to live this out in our lives, and remember that this is an act of supreme love. So this is agapic love. So the Greek term that translates as agape, there are 4 words in the Greek language, which is richer than the English language, which only has one term to communicate love. And two of the 4 familiar Greek terms, I did one on this, you can type in Corey Johnston, 1 Corinthians 13, the meaning of love, for more on the semantics of the Greek. But agape was a term so profound that the Greeks had to invent it. This describes divinity's love for humanity, and is an act of supreme self-sacrifice. The manna which fell from heaven, for instance, cost the Father nothing, but when he sent his own Son and his only begotten, that came at a great personal price. So the ransom and the purchase of our salvation was bought by the same one who ordains and paves the path to our salvation and allows us and enables him to come through him. So it is a matter of belief, and the fuller the belief, I feel, the more secure you can be. I never say never in reference to him. With man, some things are impossible, but with Elohim, nothing is. For Elohim did not send his Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world through him might be saved. So therein we read of the purpose for the condescension and the incarnation and the everything else. He sent his Son into the world that he created, which knew not him. We read of in the first chapter of John, I believe the 10th verse. But the purpose for which he sent him was not to judge the world. So he's going to return in his second coming to judge the evil and eliminate it eternally through violence. He's going to come with a sword in hand on a white horse with a crown and on a white horse, just riding to victory with his name on his robe. But that's not why he came for the first time. He who shall return as the lion came as the lamb, and he came to seek and save those who were lost. We read of in Luke 19:10, but also in Luke's account we read a similar purpose and mission statement from the Son himself, that in reference to the Samaritan village. So before John became the beloved apostle, the apostle of love, he was called the Sons of Thunder, him and his brother James, who were 2 of the trio of intimate disciples, the other being Peter. But, they had come to a Samaritan village which rejected the Messiah, and the sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder, asked him to rain fire on that village like Elijah had his own. And the Messiah gently rebukes them and corrects them and tells them that I did not come to judge the earth this time, but I came to save it. So he had spread his message of salvation, and, he did have his work did have profound influence and activities in the Samaritan world, and he broke the barriers of this entrenched, mutually antagonistic hostility between the Jews and the Samaritans. He is the veil which opens the path to salvation, and the creator of everything and all through him. But he who believes in him is not judged, but he who does not believe him is judged already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of Elohim. So this strikes to mind a passage in Romans 8:2. There is no condemnation for those who are in Yahshua Messiah, and when we believe in him, then we are in him. So believe in him, we read in this specific passage, the 18th verse. But if we are outside of him, if we do not believe in him, then we merit our own judgment, and rightly so. And there is a centrality of significance in the belief of the name of the only begotten Son of Elohim. So the name is more than a name, it is a symbolism, and Yahshua's name translates as Yah's salvation, the prefix and the suffix Yah and Shua respectively. So that's what his name means, and he is the only name through which salvation must be, as the Luke puts it in Acts 4:12, recording through the mouth of Peter. He's the only name by which we must be saved. So the word must is an imperative in there. So it's not that we want to be saved, it's that we must be saved. And the only way we can be saved is through that name and belief in it. So when we believe in it, we are in it. And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and men loved the darkness rather than the light, for their works were wicked. So the judgment is alluded to here. He is the one in whom the right and prerogative of judgment lays, and he is identified as the light of the world as early as John 1:4. He is the light and the life of the world, and the light cannot be comprehended by the darkness. So we witness much of the same dichotomy. And here the world is, now before we became born again, remember the theme of the previous lesson, the being born again passage, was that before we were then, we lived in darkness, as Paul writes in the Ephesians. It weren't that we were in darkness, it's that we lived in it, and we were slaves to trespasses and sins before we came to the light. But the problem with the sinners, and this draws a parallel between the Greek philosopher Plato's metaphor or parable of the man in the cave of ignorance, who, when he is shown the light, he is blinded by the luminosity of it, and he retreats into the darkness of his own familiar ignorance, because the truth is too much for him to handle. And that's what we witness in sinners. They have a moral revulsion as more than a mental revulsion to the concepts of salvation. For everyone who is practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his work should be exposed. So criminality in the ancient world was usually 9 out of 10 times, concealed in darkness, the light of darkness. They did not have electricity or light, so most of the criminal activity happened under the cloak of darkness. And much as criminals prefer to operate in the darkness, so too do sinners, and all sinners are lawbreakers. We may not be breaking the laws of society, but when we sin, we are breaking the laws of heaven, and that is a serious transgression. We might escape punishment for it on earth, but we cannot escape of it in heaven. And the reason that those who practice evil hate the light is because they cannot stand the exposure. That's the one thing wickedness cannot stand. It's the exposure of their own wickedness. They violently retaliate against it, because the last thing that wickedness wants is for its true characters and intents and motives to be exposed. But the one doing the truth comes to the light, so that his works are clearly seen, that they have been wrought in Elohim. So the one who is walking in truth, living honestly and with integrity, he does not have to fear the light, but he basks in the light, and he uses the light to be a lighthouse to a dark and fallen and perverse generation. And his works are visible through the light, and he, in the Beatitudes, or after them, he tells us to be the light of the world, a city on a hill which cannot be hid. So we as Christians exist to be light vessels and lighthouses in the seas and the storm of a dark and perverse generation. And we have all the proof and the assurance and the confirmation that we are in him when we are in the light. And the light is synonymous with truth. It is synonymous with divinity. It describes a facet of his attributes, but not the fullness thereof. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll pick this up sometime soon. That's all the time we have for right now. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.